My next guest says China has had a tremendous run this year, but it is a bit overdone. Brad Brooks is a senior portfolio manager at Value Line Securities with $2.5 billion in asset under management. He joins us now on set with the latest. Brad, thanks for coming in. Welcome to Bloomberg News.
Good to see you.
Little irrational exuberance in China?
I'm not sure I'd say irrational exuberance, but I think valuations are probably a little stretched there, yeah.
Why is that?
I think if you look at the multiples, I mean, the run-up this year, you're basically almost 2 times the average emerging market multiple now in earnings. And while the long-term growth expectations are great, I think it's gone a little too far at this point.
What about China officially now in a bear market?
I don't worry too much about the 20% cutoffs, those types of things.
Doesn't give you that much concern?
I think bigger picture, what I worry about at this point is that you've had an incredible monetary stimulation in the first 6 months there, almost up 6-fold from the previous year. That's really not sustainable. I think that's more what the market's worrying about now.
And their internals and multiples, they do calculate GDP differently, don't they?
That's a good point also, right? That's probably a little bit overstated given that they do calculate it different.
How much money have they injected into their system? About half $1 trillion? About $400 billion to $500 billion?
I thought it was closer to $1 trillion, which is almost half of the GDP there.
What about the outlook now for China and the U.S. markets? What is that going to look like going forward? You hear all this talk about Chinese and the Russians saying that the dollar may lose its status as the world's reserve currency. Does that play into any of this at all?
I think that's a much longer-term issue, I think.
And a longer conversation.
Yeah, that's probably really over the next 5 or 10 years, probably a very important issue. I don't think in the next year that's going to be a big problem. But the dollar is obviously probably going to continue to weaken as it has over the last 5 years.
Are you expecting a huge correction either here or in China?
Well, I think in China that's quite possible. I don't think we're looking for the type of correction we saw last year, but I think it's quite possible to see another 5 or 10% correction, sure.
All right, let's talk about your investments. Do you invest in China?
I occasionally have some ADRs, right?
What do you like?
I actually don't have much exposure right there right now. One of the companies that I am looking at that I have the convertibles and I'm looking at adding the stock is actually an oil service play that has most of exposure, some in Asia and mostly Latin America and the Middle East.
You like Brazil too, right?
Yeah, I think Brazil, if you're going to look at emerging markets, is probably a better play right now than China.
Outlook, thoughts for the U.S. market going forward?
I think, hopefully we're going to be in more of a stable environment going forward. The volatility seems to have pulled back that we've experienced the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I think there's potential for a small pullback, but I think the Fed is very aggressive here in terms of money printing, so it shouldn't be, I think, something that we saw last year.
Right. Brad Brooks of Value Line Securities joining us on set. Brad, thanks. Appreciate it.